Ethan Cole had never liked the way silence settled in his apartment lately. It wasn't the peaceful, companionable kind of silence he once cherished with Daniel Brooks. It was brittle, heavy, the kind that reminded him of things unsaid, of touches that no longer came, of words that hovered on his tongue but died before reaching the air. For years into their relationship, Daniel still loved him, Ethan knew that, but the love felt muted, dulled by routine and distance. That was why, when Marcus Hill called with the idea of a weekend trip, Ethan didn't hesitate. Marcus's voice carried the same charm it always had, confident and light-hearted, making even the simplest plans sound like an adventure. "Just a cabin, the three of us," Marcus had said. "You, me, and Jamal. Like old times. No stress. No drama. Just a break." Ethan's first instinct was guilt. He hadn't taken time away from Daniel in months. Still, something inside him yearned for the escape. Maybe being with Marcus and Jamal would remind him who he was outside the confines of a relationship that had grown too quiet. When he told Daniel about the trip, Daniel barely looked up from his laptop. "Sounds fun. You should go. A change of scenery might do you good." His tone was casual, affectionate even, but distracted. Ethan stood in the doorway a moment longer, waiting for a question, a flicker of concern, maybe even a hint of jealousy. None came. That night, Ethan lay awake beside Daniel, staring at the ceiling. He tried to tell himself the distance was normal, that every relationship went through phases, but his chest ached with a longing he couldn't quite name. The thought of the trip became a buoy he clung to. 2 days later, the drive hummed beneath him. Marcus took the wheel, as he always did, one hand draped casually over the steering wheel, sunglasses perched on his nose. Jamal rode in the back seat with Ethan, stretched out comfortably, offering snacks and easy laughter. Music pulsed through the car, old playlists from college, each song pulling up memories of nights spent dancing, laughing until their stomachs hurt, dreaming about futures that seemed so certain. Then Ethan felt lighter with them. He leaned against the window, watching the scenery blur past, and realized he had smiled more in the last 2 hours than he had in weeks. Marcus cracked jokes at every signpost they passed, and Jamal kept nudging Ethan with stories about people they once knew, each memory braided with warmth. Somewhere along the highway, Marcus caught Ethan's reflection in the rearview mirror. "You look like you needed this," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Ethan wanted to deny it, to say he was fine, but instead he offered a small nod. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had settled over the trees, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet. The cabin was modest but inviting, its porch lit with a soft glow. Ethan inhaled deeply, the scent of pine and fresh earth filling his lungs, and felt something shift inside him. For the first time in months, he didn't feel trapped. They unpacked quickly, laughter filling the rooms as Marcus fumbled with the keys and Jamal teased him about his so-called planning skills. Soon enough, they were sitting around a small wooden table with beers in hand, the conversation flowing as easily as the alcohol. Ethan found himself watching them more than he intended. Marcus's laugh was infectious, his gestures animated, drawing attention without effort. Jamal was quieter, but his calm presence grounded the group, his deep voice soothing whenever he spoke. Ethan realized he had missed this balance, the way they had once formed a kind of unspoken rhythm, each of them filling spaces the others left empty. The night deepened. Music from Marcus's phone mingled with the crackle of the fireplace. Ethan felt warm, not just from the beer but from the comfort of belonging. Yet beneath that warmth was something else, an undercurrent of tension he hadn't expected. That he caught Marcus's gaze lingering a moment too long when their hands brushed, reaching for the same bottle. He noticed how Jamal's arm rested along the back of his chair, close enough that Ethan could feel the heat radiating from him. These were small things, fleeting moments, but they landed with a weight Ethan couldn't ignore. When the clock edged past midnight, Ethan excused himself. His head buzzed, not just from the drinks but from thoughts he couldn't quite untangle. He slipped into the small bedroom that had been claimed for him, closing the door softly behind him. The cabin's quiet pressed in, broken only by muffled laughter from the other room. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, running his fingers over the quilt. He thought of Daniel, of the way they used to stay up late, whispering to each other about dreams and fears. Now, their nights were filled with silence. He thought of the ease he felt with Marcus and Jamal, of the way their presence seemed to stir something inside him he thought had gone dormant that he lay back, staring at the ceiling. His body was tired, but his mind churned. Questions circled in his head: what was he searching for, what did tonight mean, why did he feel more alive in the company of his friends than he had in the arms of his partner? Through the thin walls, he heard Marcus's voice, a low murmur followed by Jamal's laughter. Ethan closed his eyes, and instead of Daniel's face, it was theirs that filled his mind. Something inside him shifted, subtle but undeniable. It was as though a door had been left ajar, one he had promised himself he would never open. That night, as the cabin settled into silence, Ethan realized he was standing on the edge of something that could change everything. And though he told himself he would never cross that line, the truth was already whispering through his veins: he wanted to. Morning came quietly, the soft light slipping between the cabin blinds. Ethan stirred, head heavy from last night's drinks, though not enough to cloud the vividness of his thoughts. He rose slowly, trying to push away the memory of Marcus's hand brushing his and Jamal's arm behind his chair. They had been nothing more than innocent gestures, he told himself, but even the echo of them lingered on his skin. The kitchen smelled of coffee when he entered. Jamal stood barefoot near the counter, mug in hand, his hair slightly tousled, his expression calm as ever. "Sleep well?" he asked, voice carrying the kind of warmth that seemed to melt the edge of the morning. Ethan nodded, accepting the mug Jamal handed him. Their fingers touched, just for a second, but the spark was undeniable. Ethan glanced away quickly, pretending to be absorbed by the steam rising from the cup. Marcus emerged next, stretching dramatically, grinning at them both. "Breakfast outside," he declared, already pulling open the door to the porch. The three sat in the morning sun, plates balanced on their laps, the quiet of the woods wrapping around them. It felt simple, almost idyllic, and yet Ethan's chest was tight. Later, they went hiking. Marcus led the way with boundless energy, cracking jokes about squirrels and fallen branches, while Jamal hung back with Ethan, their pace slower, conversation softer. "How's Daniel?" Jamal asked eventually, the question careful, almost hesitant. Ethan hesitated, his foot pausing on a stone before he answered. "He's fine. We're fine." The word sounded hollow even to him. He tried again. "Things aren't the same as they used to be." Jamal studied him, dark eyes steady. "You don't sound happy." "I don't know what I sound like," Ethan admitted, exhaling sharply. "It's like I'm invisible lately. Like he sees me, but doesn't really see me." There was no judgment in Jamal's silence, only understanding. Ethan felt exposed, but strangely relieved. He had never said those words aloud before. By the time they returned to the cabin, the air between them was charged in a way Ethan could no longer ignore. Marcus sensed it too. He had a way of reading energy without needing words. That evening, as they sat around the fire pit outside, he kept glancing at Ethan, eyes glinting in the flames. "Remember those nights in college?" Marcus said suddenly, a sly grin tugging at his lips. "When you were the cautious one, Ethan. Always the one holding us back from trouble." "I wasn't cautious," Ethan replied, trying to sound light-hearted. "I was practical." Marcus leaned closer, the firelight catching his face. "Maybe. Or maybe you were just scared of letting yourself want too much." The remark sank into Ethan's chest like a stone. He tried to laugh it off, but Marcus didn't look away. There was no malice in his words, only an intensity that made Ethan's pulse quicken. Jamal broke the tension with a quiet chuckle, but even his smile held a different kind of weight. Ethan felt caught between them, tethered by threads he hadn't noticed being tied. The night stretched on with more drinks, music playing low from Marcus's phone. Ethan felt the warmth of alcohol, but it was nothing compared to the heat building beneath his skin. Marcus's laughter rolled through the air, bold and magnetic, while Jamal's calm steadiness anchored the space between them. Together, they drew Ethan into a current he couldn't resist. At some point, Marcus moved closer. Their shoulders touched, casual but deliberate. Ethan's heart thudded, his breath uneven. He turned to say something, anything, but Marcus's gaze silenced him. The kiss was sudden, soft at first, a test. Ethan froze, his body torn between instinct and fear. "Marcus," he whispered, but the protest lacked conviction. Marcus leaned back just enough to search his face, then kissed him again, slower this time, deliberate. Ethan's resistance crumbled. He had spent so long craving to be wanted, to be seen. The sensation of Marcus's lips, the intensity behind the gesture, unraveled him. Then Jamal's hand touched his, steady and grounding. Ethan looked up to see the calm in his friend's eyes, the unspoken reassurance that this wasn't reckless, that he wasn't alone in this. Jamal leaned in, pressing his lips softly to Ethan's cheek, then to his mouth, a gentler echo of Marcus's fire. It was too much, and yet not enough. Ethan gave in, not out of impulse, but out of hunger he had ignored for too long. The three of them moved together in a wordless understanding, the air thick with heat and tension, boundaries dissolving. Ethan felt alive in a way he hadn't in months, every touch igniting something he thought had died. He knew he was betraying Daniel, knew the weight of it would follow him, but in that moment, guilt was drowned out by longing. Later, when the fire had burned down to embers and the night was heavy with silence, Ethan lay awake. Marcus was already asleep, his breathing even, while Jamal rested quietly nearby. Ethan stared at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling with a rhythm he couldn't control. The guilt came then, sharp and unrelenting. He imagined Daniel at home, working late, trusting him. He thought of the promises they had made, the years they had built together. His stomach knotted with shame, and yet, even as guilt burned through him, another truth lingered. For the first time in months, maybe years, he had felt wanted. Desired. Seen. He turned on his side, eyes wide in the darkness. He whispered into the silence, so softly that neither Marcus nor Jamal stirred. "I crossed a line I can never uncross." The words hung in the air, swallowed by the night, but their weight pressed down on him until sleep finally claimed him. Morning broke with a brightness that felt almost cruel. Ethan blinked against the sunlight spilling through the curtains, his mouth dry, his head thick with unrest. Marcus shifted beside him, stretching with careless ease, while Jamal sat at the edge of the bed, pulling on a shirt. For a moment, the night before clung to Ethan like a second skin, warmth, closeness, a rush of desire he hadn't felt in years. Then guilt surged, sharp and unforgiving, cutting through the haze. No one spoke at first. The silence in the room was different from the one he knew at home with Daniel. This silence was loaded, weighted by what they had done. Ethan sat up slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he rubbed his face. "Coffee?" Jamal asked quietly, his voice careful, as though testing the air. Ethan nodded, though the thought of food or drink turned his stomach. Marcus only grinned faintly, stretching again before flopping back onto the pillows. "We all needed that," he said, his voice unapologetic, almost playful. The words hit Ethan like a blow. Needed. As if desire alone justified betrayal. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, unable to trust what might come out. Breakfast was subdued. The three of them sat around the table, mugs in hand, their usual banter absent. Ethan felt Marcus's gaze on him more than once, bold and unashamed, while Jamal's eyes carried something different, something gentler, almost protective. Neither helped ease the storm raging inside him. When they finally packed the car to leave, the mood was strained. Marcus hummed along with the radio, too loud, too forced, while Jamal stared out the window in silence. Ethan sat between them, his chest tight, every mile back toward the city a reminder that reality waited for him on the other side. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Daniel: "Hope you're having fun. Miss you." Simple words, affectionate even, but to Ethan they landed with unbearable weight. He shoved the phone back without replying, shame flooding his veins. By the time they pulled into his apartment complex, Ethan's thoughts were a tangle of panic and longing. Jamal gave him a steady look as he stepped out, the kind that seemed to say "I understand," while Marcus winked with a grin that promised mischief wasn't over. Ethan forced a small wave before heading inside, his heartbeat drumming in his ears. Daniel greeted him with a hug, arms wrapping around him in familiar warmth. For a moment, Ethan let himself sink into it, desperate for comfort, for the reassurance of normalcy. But even as Daniel kissed his cheek and asked about the trip, Ethan noticed the hollowness of the gesture. It was tender, yes, but it lacked urgency. It lacked the hunger he had felt the night before. The evening passed in routine. Daniel cooked pasta while Ethan unpacked. They talked about work, about neighbors, about trivial things that filled the silence but never touched the ache underneath. Ethan laughed at Daniel's jokes, smiled at the right moments, but his mind was elsewhere, flashing back to Marcus's fire, Jamal's steadiness, the feeling of being truly seen. Later, lying in bed, Ethan stared at the ceiling, his body beside Daniel's but his thoughts far away. He tried to will himself into peace, into gratitude for the life he had built. Yet the memory of the cabin gnawed at him, vivid and consuming. He turned onto his side, watching Daniel sleep. The rise and fall of his chest should have soothed Ethan, but instead it reminded him of how far apart they had drifted. He reached out tentatively, fingers brushing Daniel's arm, but Daniel didn't stir. The distance felt insurmountable, like reaching for someone across a chasm. Ethan slipped out of bed and padded into the bathroom, shutting the door softly behind him. He stared at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes looked different, haunted, conflicted, alive in a way that frightened him. Whispers from the cabin echoed in his head. Marcus's teasing, "Maybe you're just scared of wanting too much." Jamal's quiet observation, "You don't sound happy." They had seen through him in ways Daniel hadn't, or perhaps no longer cared to. The truth pressed down on him, he was living two lives now. One where he was Daniel's loyal partner, steady and dependable. Another where he was a man undone by temptation, reckless but undeniably alive. Ethan splashed water on his face, gripping the sink until his knuckles whitened. He told himself it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness that would never happen again. But even as he repeated the words, he knew he didn't believe them. When he returned to bed, Daniel stirred faintly, murmuring something incoherent before settling again. Ethan lay beside him, eyes open in the darkness. His chest ached with the weight of his secret, but beneath the guilt was a dangerous whisper of desire. He knew this was not the end. Somewhere deep inside, Ethan understood that what had begun in that cabin was only the start of a storm he couldn't outrun. And as he stared into the dark, the question gnawed at him, relentless and unforgiving: which life would he choose before it destroyed him?